I was able to see it myself. And what was amazing about these facilities, some of them are so large, and they also went in recently to what was called the NORAD facility into Cheyenne Mountain. That's a big granite mountain, been there for 40 years. All right, and that's the location shared by Canada and the United States. They have used it to detect incoming possible invasions of missiles from, let's say, Russia or China. And it's been there for years and years. And it is gigantic. It's sufficient to hold a tremendous number of people for many, many years. And the doors on these things and all are like 4 feet deep. I mean, it's just an outrageous facility. They went in about 2 years ago and removed all of the NORAD signaling system, put it to another Air Force base, and went into that mountain that they've had for so long and turned it into one of their underground survival locations. And to add to it now, I have a list on my website of approximately 103 locations beneath the United States that presently is considered to be top secret survival operations underground. I have a list of the actual locations on my website, actually, so people can get a look at that. There are a few good photos of underground facilities on my website also that people can look at when they go to all the DVD. But the big deal on my DVD is I actually have live footage inside several of the underground facilities.
Incredible, Bob, incredible. Commend you for that prolific research on DVD. Bob, the big question is, are these all linked up? I know there's a lot of talk about this. Maybe not all of these underground bases are linked up, but there's talk about maglev trains, magnetic levitation, because you're going to need maglev underground. But they're talking about maglev trains linking up these, maybe some of the big ones anyway. Do we know that for sure? Is that a definite?
Yes. And I've actually gone over interviews with drivers. And I even had truck drivers back in the 90s that had, again, sent us some of the first footage about these things. And they didn't quite understand what the heck was going on. And of course, back then, nobody did, because nobody had linked A, B, C, and D and realized it's all going in one direction with this incoming galactic kind of a problem that would be global in its effect. But in terms of the highways, and what you will actually see in the DVDs in our report, what you will actually 18-wheelers, 40-foot trucks, side by side and at intersections, crossing each other. The railroads, they have standard railroads that run in underground to some of the locations, but some of the truck drivers had told me they would go into a location like in Texas, underground, and they would drive 800 miles or 1,000 miles and end up in Tennessee, and would make their exit after offloading in Tennessee. There are railroads that are, as you said, they're the railroads that these things will travel 500 miles an hour underground, so that only a few minutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they slow down like a regular subway, and you can offload and you're in another state underground. Some of the facilities are created exclusively for growing vegetation for food. Most of them, of course, have been filling up with what we call the survival dried foods to the tune of thousands of tons of this dried foods. 2 years ago, the people in the United States that were buying this the freeze-dried survival foods were not able to even get what they were ordering, because the United States government was taking like 85% of all the production, so they could fill these underground facilities with the foods for themselves. And again, when you look at the dates, when we look at the dates of all of the people are trying to get their underground facilities totally prepared and filled with the survival foods and having them finished, the date fell at approximately the beginning of this year. In other words, most all of the contracts for food and material and construction on these facilities was to be accomplished by the first of 2014 and 2015. That was the date. So the government who are building these are not looking at a date 15 years down the road.
How long can these guys stay underground, these elitist group? Do they need to stay underground for a long period of time? If so, how long? And how? I mean, is Nibiru going to have such an adverse effect on us that they're going to have to be underground a long time? And do we have an idea how long they could stay down there?
Well, they can stay. They can stay for many years in terms of
multiple years.
They put it this way: they're all being constructed and filled with foodstuffs. And including, like I mentioned, some of them are going to be growing actually greens and animals and what have you underground in special facilities, some of which I have pictures of that as well. But they are planning that if they had to be under there for several years, that they could exist. Now, it's kind of like shooting the rolling dice, but their intention, of course, is that if they have to be there for 4 or 5 years, that they will be able to do it, as a matter of fact. And one of the facilities in the United States has the capabilities to handle about 10,000 people underground for many, many years. And again, how long? The big question between several of the groups that have been investigating this much longer than I have, feel they're not positive. In other words, they think that sometime that this planet comes around and it messes with the Earth and then goes on out and messes actually with its gravitational effects and what have you, and the debris field that it's pulling along behind it. It has this radical effect, but that maybe every time it comes around, it's not quite the same in terms of effects on the surface of the Earth. So you could have one time where it could come around and be just holocaustic, just an unbelievable problem, and the next time when it came around, that it wouldn't quite be as bad. But the belief is, and it's pretty much registered and logged in documentations of antiquity, the Chinese emperors and papers and things of that sort, that in fact it put a tilt the last time it came around, which was about 3,000 years ago, is that it tilted the Earth about 27 degrees on the axis when it came around. And of course that its gravitational effect is tremendous. You have to remember the moon and the sun kind of plays handball with the Earth in terms of our tides, our water tide levels, and it does that day in and day out. The effects of something that's 5 times the size of Earth passing within a reasonably close space distance, the gravitational effect is what caused probably the tilt of 27 degrees on the axis, and it actually has been pretty much documented that had that effect previously.
For sure. Bob, we're going to go to break in a short moment, take a quick break. Before we do, tell people where we can get a copy of the DVD, and please give us your website one more time. Sure.
It's you go on your computer, it's Fletcher Investigations.com. That's Bob Fletcher Investigations, one long word, .com. You can easily get the DVD there. We are handling distribution just for ourselves, because previously we'd had, unfortunately, a tremendous amount of bootlegging and what have you, and that kills us off. I spent a tremendous amount of time, money, and effort, and we have to recoup some of that. Somebody said to me, if it was so important, why I just didn't do this for free? And we can't, because I got to pay bills like everybody else, and I'm not some kind of a large corporate entity or something.
Sure.
And we have several other amazing investigations, including I did a special investigation for Sonny Bono as a congressman, and he was unfortunately literally murdered because of it, and it was an expose of the Central Intelligence White House connections into drug smuggling. I worked with Sonny for about a year. We were going to open up a special investigation, and he was killed 15 days before we planned to open that inquiry up. He was killed in what they called a ski accident, and he actually was, in fact, murdered.
I'm glad you mentioned killing on suspicious circumstances and murders and killing people off. We're going to get into that after the show. We'll probably have some of the astronomers, but we'll take a quick break at the moment. You listen to James Swagger. Of course, you can go to jamesswagger.com. We'll link up the show there as well, but you'll also find Capricorn Radio on YouTube and Capricorn Member. But for the moment, Bob, we're going to take a quick break and be back in just a moment. Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and we are talking to Mr. Bob Fletcher today. We're talking about Nibiru. Is it? What's the impact of it coming? Is the elite groups of the world planning this? Personally, I see evidence for it. I see it, and we've got it all in one researcher's prolific DVD, which is out now, and you can go to BobFletcherInvestigations.com. You can catch Bob. You can catch a bit about the DVD, a bit about Bob, and a bit about his research. And this guy has credentials to stand to him. This is not just a Nibiru researcher. And there are Nibiru researchers out there, but I want to draw a point to that Bob has a serious credential behind him. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Great to be here, Bob, with you today. We just talked before the break there about suspicious deaths, and I mean, there's been astronomers with, suspicious circumstances being killed off, bumped off. What?
Yeah, and that was something else that upset me many years ago when I just got into investigations of corruption at the highest levels of our government, and primarily things like massive drug smuggling and money laundering and theft and diversion of funds and all. As I said, that was actually what got me into, I ended up being hand carried down this stream to the discovery that they were stealing these gigantic amounts of money, and more money than you could even launder. I mean, you can launder a few $1 million. You could probably launder $1 billion now if you broke it into bits and pieces and you were a thief in one manner or another. But you can't launder $1 trillion. You can't take the gold from Fort Knox and run down to the local grocery store and start running it through the back door or something. You can't launder that kind of money, and that was what got me into chasing this. Now, what bothered me back many years ago when I first was a federal witness on a couple of occasions and testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee in Washington, D.C., when I was doing that, I found out about the murders over and over again of people that were whistleblowers, people that were going to blow the whistle on a drug operation or blow the whistle on money laundering of 20, 40, $80 million and things of that sort. And when those deaths would show up, that would bother me. And there's so many of them. But now, all of a sudden, as you have mentioned, what has happened is there's two groups, actually, that may be fitting into some of all connected to the same. One group are scientists and astronomers. There's a huge number of astronomers that have actually been working on trying to track down Planet X for so many years that all of a sudden have been getting killed off. Now, some of them, of course, are legitimate and had passed maybe with legitimate deaths, However, there was one case situation where about 12 of them were at a big meeting, and they were, I believe, in a gondola going over the Swiss Alps or something like that, where they actually were meeting to have a discussion about Planet X, and a whole bunch of them went down with a broken cable, and it killed off the whole group of them. And then, of course, there are random deaths of astronomers with their accidents, suicides, all sorts of strange deaths taking place with large numbers of astronomers. Now, what's also happening, which is real important, I haven't gotten a handle on it yet. I'm not sure a connection to the Nibiru and the secrecy involved with Nibiru, but there is a number of bankers, the numbers of bankers that have been murdered and committed suicide in the last, I'm going to say 3 years, is mind-boggling. It's like about 50. And these are like young bankers at very high levels, some of them in European, a good handful of them in throughout Europe, and a handful of them from here in the United States, that have just, again, all of a sudden we have this extraordinary long list of bankers that are being killed. Now, we did have an interesting situation a while back where when Ron Paul and the Senate and the Congress were trying to get information on the gold, and then, of course, we had the country of Germany, who had over 1,000 tons of gold. And in a couple years ago, they wanted to have, they wanted the money. They needed some of their gold back. They were told they could not get any of it until 2020. They were given 7 years that they were going to try and get the gold back into the hands of the German government. And then there was 4 or 5 other countries that came on, because these nations have had tons of gold on deposit at Fort Knox. And when they all got together and requested to get some of their gold back, because the money was crying out, banks needed help, they didn't get any of their gold. And they were all told the same story, that it would take several years before they could even give them a good audit. So right away, that was just another obvious point that, in fact, the gold is just not there. That's why they couldn't get it. Now, what also happened, this is what I'm getting from the bankers here, the fellow that was in charge of the International Monetary Fund for the globe, he had the same problem. He came to the United States. Now, he was, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he was in charge of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and he came in and he said the same thing. He said, I don't think the gold's there any longer, and we at the International Monetary Fund have to know what's going on, and we need to have a full audit. And he said, if I don't get that audit, I will go before the United Nations and demand an audit from the Fort Knox gold. So what happened was, now he's a gentleman who, by the way, I think he was in line to be the French president, to take on the presidency in France, if I'm not mistaken. And he's an independent billionaire. He was in New York. He made that demand. The following day, he was going to get on to his plane, personal jet, fly back to Switzerland, Geneva. And when he got on the plane, the New York Police Department pulled him off of the plane and charged him with sexual harassment, saying that this fellow, who was a billionaire, was chasing the maid, housekeeper for the hotel room he was in, chasing her around and trying to have sexual acts with her. And they actually said that they were arresting him. They yanked him out of his $10 million personal aircraft and pulled him back into the police station. Now, what happened there was they cut a deal and said, if you get on your plane and shut your mouth, don't talk about the gold any longer, and forget about that, and get the heck out of here. We will not leave you in jail in the United States. You can go home. And that was what they did to the head of the IMF about maybe 9 months ago, I guess. So if you're at a high level and you're going to shoot your mouth off about the money disappearing or any of these other real elements of this thing, that's what's going to happen.
The bankrupting of America, as is happening perpetually over the last, God knows, I know, America is in debt to bankers. But the bankrupting of America, perhaps these guys know this in advance, Bob, like you say, like we've been discussing on the show, and they're just going to let it bankrupt itself. They're going to extract what they can out of America and let it collapse and start a new system.
Well, of course, the problem is, and see, there's two different animals here. Yeah. On the one hand, that's absolutely accurate. The potential of the intentional collapse of the world finance system actually is a very much a reality, and that's back to what I was chasing for so many years, the general corruption, and what was associated to it was world government, the new world order, one world government, one financial system, one religious system, and one political system, bringing the whole world under a single umbrella. And there's no question that had been the target of corrupted government for a minimum of 50 to 70 years. And they progressively have been accomplishing it. And I believe, like I said, all of a sudden, I think what had taken place here was back in 1983 with this discovery that the discovery of the incoming of Nibiru. That what has happened is that they had to shift gears. All of a sudden they said, uh-oh, we're doing really good with world government, and we're doing this, and we're collapsing the banks and causing interdependency is such that this world government is going to be readily accepted by the people of the earth, and we're doing good, and blah, blah, blah. And, of course, this basically is a dictatorial, parliamentary, quasi, single handful of people running the entire world under one banner. Of course, they already have that, but they just hadn't formalized it, so to speak. But all of a sudden, things changed, and that's the incoming of Nibiru. They sat down with each other, and they said, uh-oh, look what we have, guys. We've got to do something. We got to put our plans a little bit on the back burner for world government, and let's figure out how we're going to survive what may be the reoccurrence of Noah's floods and the termination of a tremendous amount of life on the face of the planet. If we want to be some of the ones that are going to survive, we better start digging holes. And they called it originally expansion of continuity of government, and that was the terminology. But that's basically that is what took place, and that is a kind of a change of direction out of necessity.
You know, I commend you on your research, Bob, because what we're discussing here with people being bumped off and these guys preparing and not wanting anybody knowing this information, it's a dangerous business to do this research, Bob. So I commend you on that. I definitely do.
Well, thank you. And you know, I'll tell you what, I'm an old timer now, but there had been 3 attempts to kill me back when I was a federal witness and different elements, and I had the proper attention. I had very close people working with me that were right in the White House itself, and people that were in the intelligence community in the United States that were utilizing myself as the guy that would step forward and present some of these things. I received the amount of information that I had gotten over the last 25 years. It's just amazing. It is really bewildering. But there have been a few times where they've tried to stop me. One time back in about 97, when in fact I was blown out of my bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I still live with that, with a left shoulder that's not even connected. There's no arm connection of my skeletally to my body.
Wow.
My arm is free hanging on the left side now, and it's extraordinarily painful 24 hours a day. But you know, and without being corny, and I don't mean for it to sound that way, but it's just when I was exposed to it and realized what was happening, it became an obligation, a personal obligation that I knew A, B, and C, and I had to share it with those people that I could share it with, and that's what I've been doing.
For sure, Bob. But perhaps in a way, the reason they ceased the space program in America was because of this forthcoming event too. Could we extrapolate the reasoning to that as well?
Well, it was, and remember, everybody can, well, not everybody, but some people will remember if you're old enough, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, see, in the 80s was about the time when this reality struck them in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol, in the White House, that they had this new problem they had to contend with. And how do you contend with something like this? We have no manner at all by which we can stop it, change it, alter it, or get this thing, regardless of size or when and where. We can't do anything about it. All right, that's a reality. And so they have to start digging. But back during that time was when they were doing, here in the United States, they were doing what they called their Star Wars, was the label of it. And they theoretically were telling us that they were going to put together this huge group of satellites and telescopes and sensing devices, and they were going to be all around the globe, and they would be able to instantaneously recognize where an explosion took place or a possible nuclear weapon was being launched, and within a few seconds they could aim lasers and readjust satellites and shoot this thing down in just 35 seconds from launch and all of this stuff. The reality was the Star Wars program was for the fact that they were sending infrared telescopes and satellites out as far as they could and putting together all these new manner to which they actually could pick up and see with the infrared and locate incoming possible planets, etc. All of that stuff they were talking about that was aimed towards the Earth, a bulk of it was aimed out. It was aimed out in the other direction. It was aimed into outer space. They went down to, let's see, it's Chile. They went down to Chile and they put 15 independent infrared telescopes of an extreme capability on the mountainsides down in Chile, and they computer linked them together to where they can get infrared pictures on a regular basis, shooting, again, aimed out towards the farthest points out in our solar system. And then again, we go back to the idea that the Vatican actually put in an infrared telescope in Arizona. You know, that's kind of like, you know, what is that? What it is one more possible viewing center to keep track of this Nibiru headed back in. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. And yes, they changed many things. There's something a lot of people are not aware of at all, and I cover it very briefly in our DVD, mm-hmm. and that is an operation called Mars 1, and these are the first group of people that will be sent to Mars to colonize the surface of Mars. Now, they're talking about it in terms of a few years down the line. By 2017, they're talking about launching these people who will eventually end up colonizing the surface of Mars. Now, what I discovered many years ago when the government told us they were working on something, some type of a new weapon or a new aircraft or a new space something, when they were talking about that, usually it was already 15 years old. In other words, it was a top secret thing. They already are done, finished it, completed it, and they were talking about it's on the drawing board. And I found that institute of unbelievable spacecraft. So what I'm saying here is I have a feeling that we literally may have colonies on the moon, and or we may have colonies on Mars already. Now they're talking, you can look it up, it's called Mars 1. People can look that up, and they even have the people, they have the first people already selected, all right? But again, they're talking like in a couple of years they're going to do this. I have a feeling that these people, or similar people, may be already up there. And when you also included, I think I left a little bit of it in my DVD also, talking about a fellow named Bigelow.
Oh, Juice Bigelow, yeah.
Who has this huge space opera, and he's developed all of the buildings that will be utilized to colonize any off-planet living locations. And he's already, an interesting thing with this Bigelow Space Company is that he is a fellow in the United States in the last 5 years that has been officially designated as the person to whom all UFO information, anything connected with outer space, UFO or alien information, must go through this fellow named Bigelow at the Bigelow Space Center. And he is he's a private corporation, but now he is the official go-between. Any reports of flying saucers, anything like that at all, has to go through him now, and that is the official representative for the U.S. government, is a private enterprise.
Yeah, Rob, I think his name is Robert Bigelow. He started off from a motel chain and became a billionaire. I think he's got some surreptitious connections, though, with the government, definitely.
Oh, no question.
Yeah, no question about that.
But his corporation is brilliant. They've done some amazing things. But you know, and again, this is part of just my personal schooling has taken place doing what I've done for so long out of Washington D.C. And that is that you don't go very far in the United States if you're not, to use the term, in bed with the right people. And if you're not larceny in your soul, you don't go very far. You will not be in the Congress and the Senate for a long time if, in fact, you're honest and above board. It's not going to happen. You're either going to die young or you will be voted out, which is just all they do here in America is adjust the electronic voting system to vote, to get anybody out they want to remove. And if they can't do it that way, you'll have a heart attack, or you will have commit suicide with a small knife. You know, or you will choke yourself to death.
Bob, to focus on, because we're coming up to the end of the show, and I want to focus back to Nibiru. Nibiru's coming in. It's getting close. I'm not quite sure how close it gets. The trajectory kind of may be slightly different. It gets to Earth or not so close to Earth. But what can we expect to see, Bob, in the final days when it's getting to its perihelion, its closest approach? Are we talking solar flares, volcanoes kicking off, tidal floods, the weather systems, electrical storms, plasma discharges, the whole lot, solar flares? Is it going to go crazy for us?
You know, I'm afraid the answer to that question is yes. And when you mentioned everything you just mentioned, I would just simply say all of the above. They see what's amazing if people are not paying attention to as we speak. As we speak today, there are 45 or 46 volcanoes erupting. They're not thinking about it. They are physically erupting as we speak around the globe. And you can check that anyway. Just look up volcanoes today, put it into Google on your computer, and you'll be surprised. We had, and I predicted, again, when I did finish the DVD, I said this winter was going to be outrageous. The weather would be like nothing anybody had ever seen before. I predicted there would be volcanoes regenerated across the globe. That's happening. We've had all those dead animals coming up and washing up on the seas and all for the last couple of years. That's connected to Nibiru's effect, even though it is so far out. The solar system is like the human body. If you get a little tiny pain in your toe, you know about it immediately, and it affects your entire afternoon. Solar system, same. As Nibiru's coming in, it's acting like a ball in a bowling alley. It's striking things. I predicted on the DVD that we would have, starting in 2015, as we are today, that we would have meteorites and asteroids increasing by tremendous numbers, because it is already affecting, and like I said, like a bowling ball, way out there, it's affecting these things. And they were stable, floating around in space, and all of a sudden now they're being smacked by this thing and the gravitational effect of it way, way out there. You may not even see it yet, but like yesterday, we had a 5-ton meteorite that turned down and burned up in the sky, and it would have, if it had hit the Earth, it would have been like an atomic bomb. Fortunately, it burned up, on its way in, but it was rather close. It was that's happening all around the globe, but even the news reporting on all of these kinds of effects and things going on are not being brought together. In Miami, starting just about 9 months ago, the tide, at high tide in Miami, Florida, that's the lowland beach area here, right? The tides are coming in at regular tide 6 blocks into the city, and they've had to put pumps in the water in the city to pump the water out on a regular basis every day at high tide. Now, what's happened there is the glaciers are melting actually from underneath. So the Earth is being affected like from underneath the glaciers. They are melting, and it has already raised the water level in Miami. And by the way, Miami sea level is, I owned a home in Orlando, Florida. I was 12 feet above sea level, and that was 30 miles from the coast. So that's how low it is. People don't realize unless you live there. Okay, wow. My point is there's going to be a profuse effect. We're going to have Noah's floods potential again. We will have the effects already happening on the sun. They had an extraordinary thing just a couple weeks ago called a filament across the face of the sun, and it was a million miles long or something like that across the face. The solar flares will increase. The fellow that was in charge of the CIA a few years back quit, and when he quit, the lady in charge of the NASA security, she quit as well. Her name was Napolitano, and they all said the same thing, that our biggest problem, now they didn't tell us what it would be caused by. They don't dare do that because they'll get killed, but they'll have a heart attack or something. They said the biggest thing that will happen, it's a matter of not if it will, but it will. We will get solar flares in the next few years that will shut down all the electricity in the United States. They both said it, and it was the old head of the CIA and the head of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, said the same thing. And then they shut their mouths up after that. But, anyhow, it will be very serious, I'm afraid. And the best thing that people can do, don't just stick your head in the ground. You got to just maintain your life the best you can. You're not going to learn it from the government. They're not going to tell you about it. And when they do, we will already be under some kind of a security lockdown of martial law, probably in the entire globe.
For sure. Bob, I guess one last question or statement to wrap things up, and it's mostly for posterity. We have new listeners all the time. This may be the first time somebody's listening to a show about Nibiru. Of course, there will be people trailed other shows, but tell us how Robert Harrington fits into all this, and we'll wrap it up with that.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, say that again.
Tell us how Robert Harrington fits into all this.
Oh, Robert Harrington. Robert Harrington was the head of the United States Naval Observatory back in the 90s. Another fellow named Sitchin had written a couple of books in reference to Nibiru, utilizing the clay tablets that were Sumerian 5,000-year-old diaries, if you will, of what was going on in Sumeria 5,000 years ago. And they profusely described Planet X and Nibiru, the incoming of Nibiru, causing so many problems. Now, Harrington, as the head of the Naval Observatory, he saw it. He knew about Harrington knew about Dr. Sitchin, and he said, that's interesting, and he started looking into it. He looked into it for about 10 years, doing research the best he could with the equipment that he had at that time, and again, realizing this was United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. He finally found it. He considered that he had found it. He saw where there was a huge unknown entity way out there that was affecting several planets by making their orbits get out of shape and what have you. He contacted Dr. Sitchin. They sat down together in his observatory. Fortunately, we did get a videotape of that, so we have that for history, the meeting of the two of them. When Dr. Harrington said, there's no question about it, I have found Planet X, and you, Dr. Sitchin, you're absolutely right. And he started to put together his official paperwork report on the discovery of Planet X, and he died of what I call an instant cancer. He became sick, was hospitalized, and then was deceased. A similar cancer that has shown up coming out of the Central Intelligence covert operations previously. Anyhow, so that was the story of Robert Harrington. And again, you folks can, if you put it up on Google, you put Robert Harrington Planet X, and you can find the information on that for yourself.
Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. You've been talking to your host, James Swagger. You can follow me on jamesswagger.com, on the capricornradio.com for this show. And if you want to sign up for membership, capricornmembers.com. Of course, you want to follow today's guest. It's Bob Fletcher, investing.com. You will catch a copy of the DVD. Get a copy of this. It's incredibly important to mankind, and it's full of information pertinent from many, many aspects. Bob, again, I thank you for your time today, and we will talk in the not too distant future, I hope.
Thank you very much, and God bless everybody. Again, live your life the way you want to. Don't pull your hair out on this thing. Nobody can do anything about it, and you don't stay in the house on the basis that you might get hit by a truck tomorrow. So go on and live your life as you normally should. But you've got to get the DVD so you fully understand this. It's the most important thing ever, possibly.
Thank you again, Bob.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Okay, Bob, we'll stop the recording at that.
Okay.
There we go. 1 second, I say stop. There we go. Where's
that they've had for so long and turned it into one of their underground survival locations. And to add to it now, I have a list on my website of approximately 103 locations beneath the United States that presently is considered to be top secret survival operations underground. I have a list of the actual locations on my website, actually, so people can get a look at that. There are a few good photos of underground facilities on my website also that people can look at when they go to all the DVD. But the big deal on my DVD is I actually have live footage inside several of the underground facilities.
Incredible, Bob, incredible. Commend you for that. Prolific research on DVD. Bob, the big question is, are these all linked up? I know there's a lot of talk about this. Maybe not all of these underground bases are linked up, but there's talk about maglev trains, magnetic levitation, because you're going to need maglev underground. But they're talking about maglev trains linking.
Was taking like 85% of all the production, so they could fill these underground facilities with the foods for themselves. And again, when you look at the dates, when we look at the dates of all of the people are trying to get their underground facilities totally prepared and filled with the survival foods and having them finished, the date fell at approximately the beginning of this year. In other words, most all of the contracts for food and material and construction on these facilities was to be accomplished by the first of 2014 and 2015. That was the date. So the government who are building these are not looking at a date 15 years down the road.
How long can these guys stay underground, these elitist group? Do they need to stay underground for a long period of time? If so, how long? And how? I mean, is Nibiru going to have such an adverse effect on us that they're going to have to be underground a long time? And do we have an idea how long they could stay down there?
Well, they can stay. They can stay for many years, and they would drive 800 miles or 1,000 miles and end up in Tennessee, and would make their exit after offloading in Tennessee. There are railroads that are, as you said, they're the railroads that these things will travel 500 miles an hour underground, so that only a few minutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they slow down like a regular subway, and you can offload and you're in another state underground. Some of the facilities are created exclusively for growing vegetation for food. Most of them, of course, have been filling up with what we call the survival dried foods to the tune of thousands of tons of this dried foods. 2 years ago, the people in the United States that were buying this the freeze-dried survival foods were not able to even get what they were ordering because the United States government
up these, maybe some of the big ones anyway. Do we know that for sure? Is that a definite?
Yes, and I've actually gone over interviews with drivers, and I even had truck drivers back in the 90s that had, again, sent us some of the first footage about these things, and they didn't quite understand what the heck was going on. And of course, back then, nobody did, because nobody had linked A, B, C, and D and realized it's all going in one direction with this incoming galactic kind of a problem that would be global in its effect. But in terms of the highways, and what you will actually see in the DVDs in our report, what you will actually 18-wheelers, 40-foot trucks, side by side and at intersections, crossing each other. The railroads, they have standard railroads that run in underground to some of the locations, but some of the truck drivers had told me they would go into a location like in Texas, underground. I was able to see it myself, and was amazing about these facilities,
Mm-hmm.
some of them are so large, and they also went in recently to what was called the NORAD facility into Cheyenne Mountain. That's a big granite mountain, been there for 40 years. All right, and that's the location shared by Canada and the United States. They have used it to detect incoming possible invasions of missiles from, let's say, Russia or China. And it's been there for years and years. And it is gigantic. It's sufficient to hold a tremendous number of people for many, many years. And the doors on these things and all are like 4 feet deep. I mean, it's just an outrageous facility. They went in about 2 years ago and removed all of the NORAD signaling system, put it to another Air Force base, and went into that mountain